This is the First Time Leader's Guide to Management, where I will share with you the different things that new leaders need to make sure that they're paying attention to and developing to make sure that their teams are very successful. So if that's you, if you're a new leader looking to be effective and efficient in your new position, stay tuned. I got 5 tips to help you out. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Preston, and I help professionals just like you build exciting careers and lead awesome teams. If you haven't already, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I have new videos every Tuesday. Leading a new team can often be very, very exciting and also terrifying, especially if you don't know what to expect or what you're supposed to be doing. You most likely got put into this position of being a new leader because you're really, really successful with your technical skills, and now it's time to focus more on your social and influencing abilities to make sure that you're successful as a new leader. So let's get into the tips. Tip number 1, know the basics of leadership. So you can think of leadership and management as 2 different sides of the same coin. So on one side, you have leadership, which is oftentimes viewed as informal authority, and then you have management, which is oftentimes viewed as formal authority. So let's dive into what those mean. So first we have leadership, which I would view as informal authority, which basically means when you're in your organization, you don't have to be in charge to be a leader. You can be a new employee, you can be leading from the middle, you can be an executive, and all of those people can be leaders. Reversely, because you have a title doesn't make you a leader. So being a leader is typically viewed as being able to influence other people, which I talk about in this video about office politics and how to play them to your advantage. In order to be successful in your role, you don't always have to have formal authority, but you always need to have informal authority, which is your ability to build relationships and create a team dynamic, which I'll get into in a minute. The second side of the coin is formal authority, and that is the authority or the delegation that you are given based on your org chart. And it oftentimes dictates what the reporting structure looks like, what your authority is within the organization to sign off on expenses or invoices. And formal authority often outlines what your responsibilities are as a manager or as part of the management team when it comes to the administrative tasks of the job. So project managing, timekeeping, those sort of things. That's sort of the coin of leadership is on one side you have informal or leadership, and on the other side you have formal or management. In order to be successful in your role, you need to be able to do both. And that leads me to tip number 2, which is leading team dynamics. In order to be a leader, you need to be able to influence others. And in order to be a leader, just generally speaking, you need to have someone to lead. So when you're talking about team dynamics, or when we are talking about team dynamics, what that means is you need to learn how to create a team atmosphere so that people want to follow you. Generally speaking, people want to work with you. And oftentimes it's like personality traits or working styles or things like that that kind of dissuade people from working with you. People want to work with you, so you need to figure out what are the keys that people are looking for in leaders that allow you to be followable. 2 of the biggest traits that people look for in leaders: humility and trustworthiness. Humility is necessary when you're working with people so that they understand that you are willing to take their feedback and understand that you don't know everything. Trust is the fundamental component of what you need to get your team working together. And the nice thing about team dynamics is they're oftentimes not inherent. You kind of have to create them. And so you want to make sure that you create that team dynamic from day 1. So one example of what that might look like, in addition to the administrative part of the job, which I'll talk about in a second, is talking about how you want people to work together and what are the behaviors or expectations that you have when people are working with you. So if your expectation is that people are going to come up with ideas and they're going to come up with innovations to improve the team, you need to make sure that you're setting that behavior early, and that when that time comes when people are actually acting on that behavior, that you're rewarding them for that behavior. So being consistent with your behaviors and what those expectations are is extremely important when you're leading a team dynamic. So let me ask you the question. Write in the comments below, what are some of the expectations that you have from your team from a behavior standpoint? Let me know in the comments below. So So tip number 3 is managing the people dynamics. So we talked about team dynamics and being able to influence people on your team by being humble and being trustworthy, and just in general being a person that people like to work with. So now let's talk about the administration part of the job, how you manage people on a day-to-day level. So when you're managing people, you are going to be pulling a lot from your formal authority on the org chart. And so you need to make sure that you understand what those responsibilities are from your leadership team, what they expect you to do at a management level, and what is outlined as sort of the rules or parameters with your role that you are able to own and the sort of the field that you're able to play on when it comes to managing your team, because not every manager manages the team the same. But fundamentally, and I'll get into in a second, I'll get into what are the components that you need to break down to be able to manage your team. But before we do that, I want to talk about people management. And it's rarely, people management is usually not as difficult as what people make it out to be. A lot of what it is relationship management and figuring out how to develop people. A lot of managers don't take time to find out what their teams are motivated by, what they're looking for out of a career, and what they're expecting out of a manager. So building those relationships early on will really help you to figure out how to manage your team in a really effective way. It's your role to make sure that all relationships on your team, at least the people that are having relationships with you, that all of those relationships are open and transparent, so everyone's on the same page and can be trustworthy in that dynamic. And one thing that I want to point out here is if you are looking to develop your team but you don't know where to start, go back and watch my video about strength finders. If you watch this video on strength finders, you'll be able to find out what your team is good at and start giving them more projects that align with their strengths. And typically that helps to develop employees if they don't know where their end goal is going to be just yet. Tip number 4. So I'm going to bring together the team dynamics, the leading the team dynamics, and the managing people, and help you get organized with what are the things that you need to do tactically, what you need to do today, so that your team is on a track to be the most efficient team that they can possibly be. So, getting organized, I've broken it down. I've broken this section, tip number 4, I've broken this section down into 4 components that I want to sort of make sure that you're aware of when you're managing your team. The first subcategory is strategy and performance metrics. So this is always the starting point when you're looking at managing a team, figuring out what the strategy is that you're supposed to be conquering. If it's somehow different from the leader before or the leader that will probably follow you, you need to have a strategy in place that will dictate what your team will be doing and what they won't be doing to make sure that you're hitting your performance goals. And those performance goals are usually set out by the executive team. The other thing that you need to consider when you're talking about strategy is what are the metrics that you're going to be using to measure your team's performance. And usually performance metrics are a direct connection to whatever the corporate goals are, or whatever your strategy goals are that you have within your team. The second component of this staying organized and actually diving into management, the second component is operations. So how are you going to manage your team from an operational standpoint? What resources are you using for project management? What resources are you using for time tracking? What resources are you using for workflow? All of these things, kind of looking at operations as the day-to-day work. When your team is getting a project, how are they going to take the action items from your meeting and put them in a process that's going to be streamlined every single time? So one example of this is potentially, let's say I'm going to take marketing as an example. One of the campaigns that we're going to be running is going to be all social media. We're going to do a big social media push, and I have one team member designated to do social media. Once that employee has developed all of the content that we need for our campaign, operationally, what's going to happen to make sure that those posts get posted every single day at the right time? Those are the kind of things that you need to help think through and then balance it with budget, which I'll talk about in a second. What are the operations that are going to keep your team running, and at what cost are those operations going to be? The third component is a term that you might have heard. It's called resources. And so sometimes when you hear this term, you kind of in your head, you're like, I don't really understand it, but you kind of do. If your executives start talking about resources, what they're talking about is your employees and your budget. That's sort of the bucket that makes up resources. So once you have your strategy and you have your goals outlined to say, this is what we're going to accomplish, you know what your workflow and your operations and what tools you have available, now it's time to decide from a resources standpoint, what percent of your team are you going to delegate to certain items on your to-do list, and how much budget are you going to throw at tools? Are you going to throw at other vendors? What are how are you going to divvy up your available resources to make sure that you're hitting your company goals? If you notice though that your resources are kind of small for the goals that you have, that's pretty common. A lot of companies, believe it or not, aren't just throwing money at their teams. So you need to be aware that you're always going to kind of feel like, and it's not always necessarily the truth, but you're always going to feel like you have a deficit of resources. So you need to be, and that's part where it comes in from a management standpoint, you need to come in and decide what resources can you use to optimize and maximize your results so that you hit your goals every single time. The last component that you have that you want to make sure that you have in place when you start leading a team is innovation. And a lot of companies and a lot of managers don't do this very well. But how are you as an individual manager, or how are you as a team lead going to facilitate innovation on your team so that when the opportunity arises, you are able to lead a truly dynamic, innovative team that's cutting costs, that's maximizing ROI, that's helping the rest of the company be uplifted? Your role as a manager is to facilitate that innovation on your team. That doesn't come from the executive level. And innovation typically happens when people feel comfortable failing, which is a lot of managers don't like that, but you need to be comfortable with failure on your team and making sure that people are learning those lessons when they do fail. And another part of innovation is continually being okay with learning and feeling like you're not stuck in your ways. And one of the things, and I just want to bring this up because I know this is going to be a big topic for a lot of you right now, is if it comes up where your company needs to adapt and innovate in a very quick way and you don't have the ability to do that, try to just test some stuff out. So for example, I know this video is coming out in 2020. There's a lot of stuff happening with remote workers where a lot of companies aren't prepared, which I have a video about if you want to go back and watch how to manage remote workers. A lot of companies are having to innovate at a very, very rapid pace if they're not prepared to have employees working remotely. And if you have your team prepped and ready to innovate, you will be years ahead of your competitors or the rest of your company when it comes to adapting to changes like in this example, a pandemic. And tip number 5 is make sure that you are in alignment with your executive. So while you're leading your team, there's a ton of things that I didn't cover in this video that you might say, oh, this, I need to learn this, and this in order to be a manager. And I would not disagree. There's a ton of things that I didn't cover in this video. This is a very, very entry-level video. But if you do want to be successful as a manager and as a leader at your organization, the piece of advice that I can give you is make sure that you are aligned with what your executives would like to accomplish. You want to make sure that you know the company goals and the company direction and constantly align your team to those goals. If your company wants to create a more meaningful customer experience and you are in charge of marketing, your role is to constantly be communicating with those executives and getting feedback very early and very often to make sure that you are staying in line with what their expectations are. This will help you both grow informally, your informal authority, and it will help you grow your formal authority as well. And if you want to take this step one step above, I would recommend finding an executive champion or an executive mentor, which I have a video on here. Find a mentor who can help you navigate and discern the different things that are important to the executive team to help you continually be in alignment with what's going on. Like I said before, this will be enough to get you started and to get you pointed in the right direction, but I would say if you are interested in management, don't forget to subscribe, by the way. If you're interested in management, try to find other resources, like Harvard Business Review is a really good example, but try to find other resources to help you continually grow as a mentor. And if you would like to, I have a newsletter. Go to benjaminpreston.com. I'll link to it below as well. Where you can sign up for my newsletter, and I'll continually send you leadership and management advice and research and things like that, and keep you up to date. But I would just say continue to learn and continue to grow, because you're going to continue as the world evolves. There's going to be more research, more new findings, more new way to manage people, and all of those are super helpful to you as a new manager to make sure that you're up to date with how to manage your team in the most efficient way possible. And that's all I have. That's my video, my 5 tips for first-time leaders. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment. Don't forget to subscribe, and I have new videos every Tuesday, so I will see you there.